Choose. Okay, we're going to lay out our stitch pattern now. I start out with a piece of paper that I've cut with the same front pattern. The reason for this is your back pattern's bigger. If you draw a stitch pattern for the back, it won't fit on the front. Okay? Remember that. So, first thing we do is we've got a piece cut out to the same dimension that our front pattern is. We take and we fold it in half, like so. This will give you a dimension to stitch on to keep everything in context. If you want to, you may want to measure in on the edge 1/4 of an inch and draw a line, just like that. Can you see that? Yeah. Because this is where your side seam is going to go, and you don't want your stitch pattern running out into your side seam and cutting it off on it. So if you come in here and draw this 1/4 of an inch, that'll give you the leeway, and you'll know exactly how much that you have to use. I'll draw out a stitch pattern here. When you draw your stitch pattern, keep in mind that you're going to have more than one row of thread on it, and it's going to grow. So when you come to your points and so forth, determine whether it's going to be an inside stitch pattern or an outside stitch pattern. If it's going to be an inside stitch pattern, you can extend your outside points quite a bit. Keep that in mind as you're laying it out. I also try and lay out my stitch patterns so that I get quite a few zigs in the area down in here to give it that support. I try and sew as much as I can down in here to stiffen up this area, because that's where it bends the most on a Western boot.
Don't be afraid to copy patterns. If you see a good looking pattern on a boot and you like it, copy.
Use it. The boot companies do it, I do it. I'll take a part of a pattern off of one boot, mix it with another. I'm not a terribly gifted person when it comes to stitching patterns. I mean designing patterns, because they look so different on the boot over what they look like on paper. So I'm not afraid to use somebody else's design. Boot companies do it all the time. And it's also very hard to come up with something original. Just about everything you think of is going to be tried. One way or another, you're going to find part of it in a pattern somewhere along the line.
Think you come up with something really fantastic, and a week later it'll come into your shop.
Yeah. My first ones always ended up looking like either Christmas trees or outer space spiders with about 8 legs. So don't get discouraged by that. Okay, can you see that?
Hang on a second.
If not, I'll outline it in a black pen.
It's pretty light.
Okay. This is one of my more favorite patterns. I know this one a little better than a lot of them I use. You can have some patterns stitched up and let your customers choose the pattern. The biggest trouble with that is it doesn't look like it's going to when it's on their boot. And color combination makes a big difference. Putting a red and a green into a boot pattern on a different color leather changes it completely. So I usually try and tell them, why don't you leave that to me? You give me an idea whether you want them more towards the gaudy side, more towards the plain side, and that's kind of what I gear them to. If they don't say anything at all, I look at how the fellow's dressed. Some of the ranchers up here, if you stitched a pretty wild boot for them, you'd probably buy it. So I gear an awful lot of that to that.
And sometimes they'll want one exactly like the boots they've got on.
Yes, yeah, you bet. You bet. I've had them walk right in, hand me a boot that's about 30-some years old and say, make me one just like that. That's fine with me. That's what they're paying for. There we go. Give you an idea what half a pattern looks like.
Okay.
Okay. Now, we're going to take her when it's folded, and take your breakaway knife again. and I slice. I keep it doubled up like this, layer down tight so it doesn't move on you, and I cut through, and I leave just enough meat in between the cuts to hold the pattern together. I come down on all my points though. I make sure that all my points have at least a cut down to them.
On one side.
On one side. So that you know where you start and stop at. You don't want to end up stopping up here on both sides of the cut you're making, because you're not going to know where you're going. So I'll cut here, stop a little bit, cut again, come down here, stop, cut clean down to my point, cut this point and stop short on this one. Do that all the way through. I'll show you what she looks like when we get done. It's a good way to keep your patterns symmetric too, because when you get done with this, they're going to be exactly the same on both sides instead of trying to draw them out the same. When you get done this way, they will be exactly the same. Just be sure and catch all your corners.
Be sure and leave enough meat that it'll hang together too, because you don't want to pick it up and end up with paper doll, which has happened if you're talking and trying to cut at the same time.
Yes, yes, yes. I think probably this is one place where you get to express yourself the most. The only thing left is your imagination.
Yeah, I think maybe I can.
Anyway, you're all set to go with a pattern that matches. Now, we'll trace the pattern onto the leather. This used to be done two ways. You could take tissue paper, tracing paper, and make a pattern, such as some of these. And then you would take and you'd run it through your sewing machine with just the needle, poke holes in it. And you'd lay your tracing paper over your boot where you'd want your pattern, like so, with the holes in it. And you take a little bag of talcum powder and dust it. You'd lift up your deal and you'd have your pattern on here. I used that for several years and it works fine. The drawback to it is if you sneeze, if you lay it over there and somebody comes along and puts their big hand on it, it don't matter. Once that has been touched, your pattern's ruined. It also has a tendency to smudge as you're sewing. This way that we're going to show you, you can leave these lay over there for a week and it doesn't change. It comes off just as easy. Maybe it's even a little bit more exact. I have had trouble sometimes with the talcum powder stuff, finding which way to go next, because it does have a tendency to migrate. You can clear that up a little bit by putting rubber cement on the outside of your leather first and then talcum powdering it, and then it sticks. The drawback to that is that sometimes that rubber cement will take the finish off your leather. I've had that happen. The only drawback to this particular method is sometimes on silver leather you have to take the light off your machine and work with a glanced, deflected light to pick up the line. That's the only problem I've come up with so far with it. I'm laying this over the top of my pattern, just like this, over the top of my boot top. When we get to stitching, you'll also see why we use the center line marked on the outside of them. And I just take and put a tack up in the corner of each one. Put your tack up high enough into the outside, that hole is going to be cut off when you put your side seam on. Okay. Now this is silver marking cloth. They use this in the bigger factories with a machine The stencil comes down and hits this once, and shows them where to sew the boot together. You slide this under your pattern, under your sewing pattern, on top of your leather. Slide it all the way up. This piece that we'll be sending you will be much more powdered than this. This one's been used probably 100 times. You won't wear that out quickly, so don't worry about it. If you want to take some of the silver off, take a towel and rub it around in a towel for a while, and it won't be quite so messy. Once they get to this vintage, they become very valuable because they aren't messy anymore. Anyway, then you take a scribe of some kind and start out at one end of your pattern and just follow your knife cuts. I usually try and start at one end and work my way through to the other side. That way I don't forget any. Don't have to push very hard. Very lightly.
Yeah, especially with new cloth, you can just about just drag it and it'll be there.
Yeah. These patterns are generally good. You can probably use this stitch pattern on this particular piece of paper over and over for 15, 20 boots, 20 pair of boots pretty easily without it starting to tear. If you wanted to make a more durable one, I suppose if you made it out of heavier leather again, it would stand up better.
Heavier paper.
Heavier paper, I mean. Goes relatively fast. Now, you lift up your paper pattern again, pull your cloth out, and you can look at your stitch pattern before you disturb this to see if you forgot anything. Because it's nailed in place, you can go right back to where you were. Then pull your nails out. And you've got your pattern transferred to your top. Pretty slick way of doing it. I'll go ahead and trace out the rest of these. Use a little discretion when you line this up so that your top patterns match from front to back. Don't just throw this on in any direction, because that's part of a good quality boot, is when you look at it, the points on both your stitch patterns match front to back. Again, slide it underneath.
And when you do the back, you just split your space on each side with your same front pattern.
Right. You're using your front pattern, so you've cut your front scallop. You've cut this. And when you lay this white piece of paper on your back, you've got your center line again to line this notch up to. I'll show you that when we get to her. Again, that center line you traced on there helps immensely. You can almost jump over your areas that you've left to hold your pattern together if you aren't pushing too heavy, with no trouble at all. And you might want to try that talcum powder layout. It'll make you appreciate this so much more. And we've got another one. Now the back ones, as Doug was saying, you just divide your back. If you've taken and drawn the center line like I was telling you, works very well, then you just put your notch on the center line. You've got it divided for you. Works pretty slick for that. You can go through the trouble of making a enlarged pattern for the back. There's going to be a little bit of a discrepancy on the bottom here on the two of them. as far as how far away the stitch pattern stays from your side seam here, because the back is a little bit larger here. Most of the time I don't worry about that. It's so small that you don't notice it.
You got any more to say?
No?
So we'll cut her off until we get those done.
Okay.